Good morning, everyone. Madam Chair, with your permission, we will proceed now to confirm the quorum. Good morning. This is a hybrid protocolary session of the Permanent Council. We have delegations here in the Hall of the Americas and delegations connected outside headquarters. Between these two groups, we have the following delegations participating: Antigua and Barbuda, Argentina, Bahamas, Barbados, Belize, Bolivia, Brazil, Canada, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Ecuador, El Salvador, the United States of America, Guatemala, Guyana, Haiti, Honduras, Jamaica, Mexico, Panama, Paraguay, Peru, the Dominican Republic, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, St. Lucia, Suriname, Trinidad and Tobago, and Uruguay. We have quorum, Madam Chair.
Okay. Thank you, SG. Good morning. I am pleased to declare this protocolary meeting of the Permanent Council, which has been convened to receive the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, His Excellency Dr. the Honorable Ralph Gonzalez. The order of business is approved. I invite all meeting participants to rise as we welcome the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, His Excellency Dr. the Honorable Ralph Gonzalez.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Audrey. Thank you. Thank you.
His Excellency Dr. the Honorable Ralph Gonzalez, Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and distinguished members of his delegation. Ambassador Luann Gilchrist, Permanent Representative of St. Vincent and the Grenadines to the OAS. Distinguished Permanent, Interim, and Alternate Representatives of the Member States, Mr. Luis Almagro, Secretary General, Ambassador Nestor Mendez, Assistant Secretary General, distinguished permanent observers, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Permanent Council of the Organization of American States, it is an honor for me to greet the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, His Excellency Dr. the Honorable Ralph Gonzalez, and to offer him a most cordial welcome to this House of the Americas. The illustrious Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines is a prominent Caribbean politician who has been a key figure in the political landscape of St. Vincent and the Grenadines for several decades, serving as a Prime Minister since 2001. Prime Minister Gonzalez has been instrumental in shaping the nation's policies. He is also the longest-serving elected head of government in this hemisphere. Born in Colonial St. Vincent, he was raised in a family that was actively involved in politics and social activism. His father was a trade union leader, while his mother was known for her community service. This environment laid the foundation for his commitment to public service. Prime Minister Gonzalez pursued his higher education at the University of the West Indies in Jamaica, where he obtained a bachelor's and master's degree in economics. He then continued his studies at the University of Manchester in England, earning a PhD in government. His doctoral studies at the University of Manchester also included 1 year at the University of Makerere in Uganda. Later, he was called to the bar at Gray's Inn in London, and was a practicing lawyer in St. Vincent and the Grenadines for several decades before his election as Prime Minister. Prime Minister Gonzalez's political journey began in the 1960s when he became actively involved in student activism at the University of the West Indies. In 1982, he formed the Movement for National Unity Party, which later gave way to the formation of the Unity Labour Party. He was elected as a Member of Parliament in 1994 and subsequently became the leader of the opposition. In March 2001, he was first elected as Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and focused his leadership on economic growth, poverty reduction, greater access to education, and social equality. Under Prime Minister Gonzalez's leadership, St. Vincent and the Grenadines has achieved notable advancement in various sectors. His government introduced initiatives to enhance education, healthcare, and infrastructure development. The Education Revolution program sought to improve access to quality education with investments in schools, scholarships, and educational technology. Additionally, healthcare reforms were done aimed to provide the population with better medical facilities and services. Prime Minister Gonzalez's administration prioritized environmental sustainability, acknowledging the country's vulnerability to climate change. He advocates for global action on climate issues and spearheaded efforts to protect marine and coastal ecosystems in the Grenadines. Prime Minister Gonzalez's diplomatic efforts extend beyond his nation's borders. He advocates for greater unity among Caribbean nations to address common challenges and seize collective opportunities. He has been a champion of regional integration through organizations like the Organization of America of Eastern Caribbean States, the OECS, and the Caribbean Community, CARICOM. As a longtime champion for reparations for Native genocide and slavery, his leadership was instrumental in the formation of the CARICOM Reparations Committee. In 2019, at his country's behest, Prime Minister Gonzalez led a successful bid for a non-permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council for the period January 20 to December 2021, making St. Vincent and the Grenadines election an historic one as the smallest nation to have ever been elected to and serve on the UN Security Council. In January this year, Prime Minister Gonzalez assumed the presidency of the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, over which she will preside for the period 2023 to 2024. Excellency, your leadership as the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines has been marked by dedication to the betterment of your country, the Caribbean region as a whole, and to the international community. Your journey from an activist to a statesman is a testament to your unwavering commitment to public service. Through your policies, achievements, and enduring legacy, you have left an indelible mark on the history and future of your nation. As the permanent representative of Jamaica, a fellow CARICOM sister nation, it is an honor for me to welcome you once again to this esteemed hall, the Hall of the Americas. Honorable Prime Minister, OAS member states, thank you for your visit today. At this time, I am pleased to offer the floor to Mr. Luis Almagro, Secretary General of the Organization of American States. Mr. Secretary General, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Prime Minister Ralph Gonsalves, greetings also to my distinguished colleagues and friends. Prime Minister, it is a great privilege and honor to welcome you once again to this House of the Americas. You are a very referential leader of this hemisphere, Prime Minister. Your publications have been an educational tool for Latin Americans and Caribbeans in ways to confront and overcome the difficult issues of making politics, economy, and society work in an integrated society, and also underline the importance of a strong labor movement and trade unions. Also, your passionate advocacy for a more perfect union in CARICOM have been admirable and inspiring, particularly as they point the way for CARICOM to secure a seat at the table of international decision-making. With this in mind, Prime Minister, congratulations on assuming the presidency of the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, CELAC, and for being the first CARICOM leader to be elected unanimously to this position. The countries of CELAC are certainly taking profiting of being guided by your size, political and hemispheric experience over the next several months. Also, a happy belated birthday on another milestone year which you celebrated on August the 8th. Prime Minister, I concur with your sentiments on making purposeful efforts toward regional integration and for promoting dialogue to sustain democratic institutions and healthy democracies in the region. Sir, you have taken a principled stand on ideological differences. You have advocated the right for different ideological positions to coexist, not in conflict and confrontation, but in tolerance and cooperation, seeking the best of all ideologies to fashion positions best suited to the region. In this regard, you have not only been a voice of reason, you have also been a teacher. I want to highlight your elaboration studies about ideology. Definitely, the ideological elaboration is essential, just as much as the ideological study is essential. We have to responsibly apply ideas to the reality of our societies without losing rationality and without losing pragmatism, because the reason has to meet the logic of our needs in order to create a utopia that guides us through our practical dimension of the things we need to solve. I also acknowledge your efforts in support for a dialogue with certain countries where there have been evidentiary issues in the hemisphere. The OES supports all initiatives that are aimed at maintaining good neighborliness and promoting peace for the benefit of all people of the Americas. Prime Minister, while political critics may criticize your unrelenting support to overcome centuries of gender inequality, I must applaud your efforts to integrate the full and equal representation and participation of women and girls in the decision-making process in your country. As an example, your Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Honorable Kissel Peters, as well as our dear friend and most efficient ambassador, Luan Gilchrist, as well as her predecessor, La Celia Prince. Prime Minister, all these Caribbean women do your country a great honor in the Council of the OES. Our organization is continually working to address regional concerns, specifically ones held within the Caribbean community, such as the situation in Haiti, the climate crisis, natural disaster preparedness, efforts towards reparatory justice, appeals to the international financial institutions for access to concessional financing, combating drug trafficking, and other security concerns that create challenges for our dear sisters and brothers in the Caribbean community. I have highlighted time and again the importance of having a more fair financial institutions in the world. No treating Caribbean countries, no treating Latin American countries and enemies when they have to support their development. I have highlighted time and again the importance of the Caribbean Constituency and this organization and in the whole multilateral system in the world. CARICOM provides balance and reasoning on matters that affect all the people of the Americas. I endorse your statements in Haiti in that we must be balanced in any negotiations with the actors in Haiti. Dr. Gonsalves, you are principled in your determination and advocacy pertaining to several issues, including the issue of reparatory justice, about which you raised at the European Union CELAC summit held last month, acknowledging that it is time to have a mature conversation on the subject. As pro tempore president of CELAC, you were able to appeal to the countries to include the item on the joint declaration with the European Union, stating that the countries acknowledge and profoundly regret the untold suffering inflicted on millions of men, women, and children as a result of the transatlantic slave trade. I congratulate you on that accomplishment. Despite the claims issued by detractors who characterize reparatory justice as a distraction, we at the OES will support efforts towards reparatory justice, which includes appeals for debt relief and debt support to former colonies in the Americas, and for the development of academic, health, and cultural initiatives for our peoples in the Americas from former colonial powers. As you asserted to the OES Permanent Council on your last visit to the organization on November 6, 2015, the quest for reparation is not conceived as strategic confrontation against these European nations, although it is for us in the Caribbean a defining issue in the 21st century for justice, reconciliation, and righting of historical wrongs. Indeed, Prime Minister, this is an important pathway to dismantle the remnants of our dark history and instead bring understanding and reconciliation. Prime Minister, I thank you and your government for your continued support and contributions to the OAS, including your most recent donation of a painting by Calvert Jones to the Art Museum of the Americas, which expands our Caribbean collections. On this and many more matters, may you continue to make a difference by courageously walking on the road least traveled. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General. I now have the distinct honor to offer the floor to the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and Grenadines, His Excellency, Dr. the Honorable Ralph Gonzalez. Mr. Prime Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. First, I'd like to acknowledge the Chair of the Permanent Council, Her Excellency Audrey Marks, who is the Permanent Representative of Jamaica. His Excellency, the Secretary General of the Organization of American States, Louis Almagro, my friend, the Assistant Secretary General, His Excellency Nestor Mendez, and permanent representatives and alternate representatives, permanent observers, and the staff of the Secretariat. I first of all would like to thank the leadership of the OAS for having a gathering of this kind today and accord me the privilege of having a conversation with you from the podium. I am very, very pleased that the chair of today's proceedings is a graduate of the premier university in the Caribbean, the University of the West Indies, and university which I also attended and which I taught for some years, both in Jamaica and in Barbados. She was a member of Mary C. Cole Hall. Mary C. Cole is a very famous Jamaican woman who distinguished herself as a nurse with traditional medicine in the Crimea. Yes, the Crimea. This is a woman who taught herself nursing and who had traversed Latin America and lived for quite some time in Panama, and was a businesswoman, a nurse, and she is seen as one of the leading black personalities who ever lived in the United Kingdom. She is revered among black people who are nurses, and indeed is seen as the equal of Florence Nightingale, who was in the Crimea at the time when Mary C. Cole was there. So I'm very happy for my dear sister Audrey to be welcoming me here to this august body. I also want to say to her, as I've said many, many times before, that Jamaica taught me a great deal. I was a student there for 5 years at the University of the West Indies. Went there as a young man, and it brought me into manhood, and I also lectured there for a couple of years after I had finished my doctoral studies in the United Kingdom. So I owe a lot to Jamaica, and I want to thank you and the people of Jamaica very much. Thank you. I want to make one correction in the notations concerning my family background. Though my father left school at 11 years old to work on a plantation as an agricultural laborer and became a small businessman. He was a peasant farmer. He was not involved in trade unionism, though he had always been sympathetic to the trade union movement and always imbued in me a sense of justice and fairness and equity, which in part fueled my own political consciousness. And I remember him very much, and so too my mother, who fathered me. Today, I want to speak on a broad subject with you, a time of respair, R-E-S-P-A-I-R. Beyond COVID, economic dislocation, climate emergency, and global turmoil. Fresh hope for Latin America and the Caribbean. In March 2020, the World Health Organization declared the raging COVID-19 pandemic a global health emergency of disastrous proportions. For some 18 months or more, the global economy was plunged into a veritable tailspin as a consequence of this continuing public health disaster. Practically every economy in the world suffered moderate to severe declines. Particularly hard hit were underdeveloped and developing economies, inclusive of most in Latin America and the Caribbean, home to 650 million people. Simultaneously, the ravages of man-made climate change, including hurricanes, storms, landslides, drought, land degradation, desertification, and biodiversity calamities were evident in every corner of the globe, including our America, to use Jose Marti's telling description, and also in our hemisphere. My own country, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, additionally suffered 21 volcanic eruptions in April 2021, giving rise to the evacuation and temporary resettlement of 20% of our population. Meanwhile, the contradictions in the global political economy within and between nations, exacerbated by regional wars and conflicts, were laid bare in all their deleterious fallout for the whole of humanity to witness. Then, on February 24th, 2022, Russia launched its so-called special military operation in Ukraine, but which 141 of 193 member states of the United Nations denounced as military aggression. The adverse knock-on economic and political turmoil globally was swift, sharp, extremely painful, and continuing to this day. Hundreds of thousands of lives have been lost, and much valuable treasure has been wantonly dissipated by the active participants in this European theater of war. Globally, and certainly in our America, poverty and hunger increased, food insecurity grew exponentially, the entire menu of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals suffered huge setbacks, living standards in most countries have fallen and are falling further, public and private debt grew geometrically as expenditure soared and revenues fell. Everywhere, the faces of men and women grew pained and anxious. They are still pained and anxious today. Currently, the economies of Latin America and the Caribbean have been struggling to return to pre-pandemic levels. Some have been successful in this regard, some are making limited progress, and others yet are in a downward spiral descent. Excellencies, you the informed and sophisticated audience at the Permanent Council of the OAS know in detail the catalogue of the recent travails of our people and understand the proximate and root causes of the debilitating and challenging condition of our America as manifested in our people's lives, living, and production. So there is no further need for me to regale you with a diet of lamentations. In any event, morning by morning, new mercies we see. All that we need, thy hand has provided. Great is thy faithfulness. In the midst of all the dislocations, disasters, suffering, and setbacks in our America, there is nevertheless a hopefulness and a determination of our populations to turn the setbacks into advances, to avoid a further desecration of our future, to recover and to rebuild, in short, to respair, that is, to embrace fresh hope for a recovery and a better condition of life from the condition of dislocations, disruptions, uncertainties, despondency, and despair. In this quest to respair, to embrace fresh hope, goes to our existential beings. It encompasses too faith and love, the trilogy of which are resident in our people's consciousness as core essences of our Judeo-Christian socialization and the resolute experiences of our America, shaped by a solidarity which emerges from the genius of our people. This genius of our people flows from a fluid space in their consciousness, conditioned by the fever of our history, awash with possibilities beyond the ordinary, the regular, the normal, the usual. It is this existential spirit and yearning from which we must draw individually and collectively. In our respairing, it is that which encompasses a social individualism and solidarity beyond and in contrast to a limiting atomized individualism of an unfettered market economy and a dog-eat-dog survival of the fittest. A society grounded in naked individualism is unsustainable. At a time of grave challenge which our America faces today, it is necessary and desirable to foster our people's instinctive sense of social solidarity, goodness, and good neighborliness in national unity, not ugly divisiveness, craven dishonesty, and partisan self-interest in quest of an illusory power. Indeed, all of us, every single one of us, in our respective societies and across the globe, we are metaphorically on the dangerous road to Jericho. Our America has to be re-energized in its pursuit of a deepening of regional integration and internationalist solidarity, steeped in multilateralism and international law, devoid of the hypocrisy of great powers and their yearning for imperium, hegemony, or a facile manifest destiny. Our America possesses regional institutional arrangements of its own creation, which must be strengthened and refreshed for the current trying times. There are several noteworthy ones, including, first, the Caribbean Community, CARICOM, a 15-member bloc of economic integration and functional cooperation, stretching through the archipelago from the Bahamas in the north to Trinidad and Tobago in the south, and thence to Belize in Central America and Guyana and Suriname in South America. And of course, it includes Haiti, French-speaking Caribbean, and Suriname, Dutch-speaking, in addition to the other English-speaking member states of CARICOM. Secondly, the Association of Caribbean States, the ACS, a 25-member grouping in the Caribbean and Latin America washed by the Caribbean Sea. El Salvador is a member, though it is it's washed by the Pacific Ocean, but El Salvador is so entwined with Central America that you have to be in the Association of Caribbean States. And the ACS focuses on functional cooperation in trade, technology, transportation, tourism, and disaster preparedness. Thirdly, the Southern Common Market, Mercosur, with 5 full members and 7 associate members. Fourthly, the Amazon Cooperation Treaty Organization, consisting of 8 countries dedicated to preserving and enhancing the lungs of the world, the Amazon forest. Fifth, the Central American Integration System, which comprises 8 countries. And sixth, the Bolivarian Alternative for Latin America and the Caribbean, which consists of 9 member states. And seventh, the 33-member Community of States of Latin America and the Caribbean, CELAC, which is the premier political integration mechanism of our America. St. Vincent and the Grenadines, as you have heard, currently holds the pro tempore presidency of CELAC. CELAC has an integration focus quite distinct from the mandates of the OAS and not designed as an alternative to the OAS, and it possesses enormous potential for good. It's very important for me to emphasize that CELAC was never designed as an alternative to the OAS. It's important for that to be repeated. Indeed, I'll tell you this, the 2 current leaders in the hemisphere, in our America, who were there at Bahia when the original idea was broached. The 2 leaders are my dear brother, President Lula, and myself. Of course, my brother Lula took a sabbatical, as you know, and I have been around since 2001. So I don't want distinguished Secretary General for it to be noised abroad that CELAC is seeking to replace the OAS. We have different mandates, and I was there at the original design, and I know what CELAC is about. It is not about your mandates. It has a different focus. And this CELAC has enormous potential for good. The member states of CELAC have a land area of 7.88 million square miles and a population 650 million. In the aggregate, they have a nominal GDP of approximately $5 trillion. Brazil, the largest economy in CELAC and the 12th largest globally, has a GDP of about $1.7 trillion. And Mexico, the 2nd largest economy in CELAC and the 15th largest globally, has a GDP of just over $1.3 trillion. CELAC is an appropriate vehicle to engage the USA on a range of matters touching and concerning the material and political interests of both CELAC and the USA. Indeed, I'm using this forum to indicate something publicly which I've done privately for a conversation between CELAC and the United States of America. Indeed, when at the Summit of the Americas, certain matters were not able to be discussed in a manner in which they ought to have been discussed, consequent upon the exclusion of 3 countries in our hemispheric family, that is to say Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. And consequently, some other countries either didn't attend or their leaders did not attend. Let's take something of great importance to CELAC and also to the United States of America: migration. How are you going to discuss migration at any gathering without talking to Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Mexico, Honduras? We have to be mature and reflective on these questions. That's one. But there are others which we can talk about. Similarly, CELAC ought to have an encounter between itself and Canada. CELAC-2 is the preferred mechanism for our America to develop joinders and linkages with the European Union, as was demonstrated recently in July 2023 at the EU-CELAC Summit in Brussels. In September 2023, on the margins of the United Nations General Assembly, CELAC has planned interfaces with the African Union and India. Indeed, yesterday, on Wednesday afternoon, I had an engagement, a preparatory engagement with the permanent mission of the African Union in New York. CELAC is also pursuing possible engagements with the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, the People's Republic of China, the Arab League, and other groupings globally. I know when I mention an engagement also with the People's Republic of China, that some may say, but St. Vincent and the Grenadines has diplomatic relations with the Republic of China. Taiwan. First of all, I see no contradiction here. I represent a constituency in CELAC where overwhelmingly they have diplomatic relations with the People's Republic of China. And I have to represent my constituency. I represent my constituencies all the time over my life as a politician and as a leader. It's not going to be any difference here. In any event, there is, as far as St. Vincent and the Grenadines is concerned, one magnificent Chinese civilization, 6,000 years old. And that civilization, like other large civilizations, and even smaller ones, have legitimate political expressions organized as states. The interest of St. Vincent and the Grenadines is to see peace across the Taiwan Straits. And we engage as is necessary and desirable with all countries, and to have conversations with all countries all over the world without compromising fundamental principles to which we adhere. Our America is also served admirably by regional financial institutions of a developmental kind, such as the Caribbean Development Bank, the borrowing members of which are from the English-speaking and non-borrowing members such as Canada, the United Kingdom, Italy, Germany, Venezuela, Mexico, and the People's Republic of China. The Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean, the CAF, which has 19 members, 17 of which are from the Caribbean and Latin America, and 2 from Europe. And the powerful Inter-American Development Bank, headquartered here in Washington, led by the USA. The IDB comprises most countries from Latin America and some from the Caribbean, along with major developed countries such as the USA, Canada, Japan, Italy, Spain, France, the United Kingdom, and the European Union. Hemispheric linkages of our America and North America, that is to say Canada and the United States, find institutional expression in the Organization of American States. Unfortunately, for various reasons, Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua are absent. Sadly, too, an egregious error was made last year, in our view, by the host country, the United States of America, to exclude Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua from the Summit of the Americas. It is high time that a great power like the USA exorcise its nightmarish ghosts from the 20th century, which still populate the minds of too many leaders in Washington. In a world so racked by awesome existential challenges, it is infantile to persist with these exclusionary vanities. Certainly it is not mature, in my judgment. Engagements without preconditions and without unilateral sanctions or impositions are sensible, practical paths for mature leaders of understanding and wisdom to pursue in the interest of peace, security, and prosperity. On this bundle of matters, there's a fierce urgency of now. You know, the Hebrew people in the Old Testament have taught us that it is important to acquire knowledge, which is information which is properly interrogated, to lend an attentive ear, and to have our eyes observe. And let all that lead to understanding, and that we must apply our hearts to wisdom. These are fundamental verities which leaders all across the world, I submit, ought to reflect upon and embrace. I repeat, engagements without preconditions and without unilateral sanctions or impositions are sensible, practical paths for mature leaders of understanding and wisdom to pursue in the interest of peace, security, and prosperity. On this bundle of matters, there is a fierce urgency of now. The countries of our America and North America are part and parcel of the network of global institutions, including the United Nations and its specialized agencies, and the international financial institutions of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. The UN, the World Bank, and the IMF are urgently in need of meaningful reform in order to better serve our America and other emerging and developing countries. It is well near universally accepted that these institutions were fashioned in the world of the immediate post-Second World War period, vastly different from the one that exists today. These global institutions must be re-engineered and transformed to serve humanity much better than they currently do. The immediate post-1945 power arrangements have an air of unreality and more for today's urgent tasks. There are numerous reform proposals which have been credibly and persuasively canvassed, and you know about them. Unless the ancien regime is altered, newer, more efficacious parallel structures will be established. Indeed, one discerns more than tentative steps in this regard already. The bipolar world in the decades after 1945 is history. The unipolar world of American triumphalism in the immediate aftermath of the collapse of the Soviet Union has been given way to other centers of global economic and political power, even though the USA remains the dominant power in economic and military terms. One does not have to subscribe to the thesis of the Thucydides trap to appreciate that the dialectics of altering dynamics are emerging or have emerged. It may not be conclusively established from history or reason that it is natural and inevitable for violent clashes to occur when a rising power threatens to displace a ruling power. It nevertheless portends potentially dangerous or uncontrollable conflicts or dislocations, which may inflict untold and unpredictable damage to much or all of humanity. Mature and wise leadership is required. Of course, you and I know that men and women make history, but only to the extent that the circumstances of history permit them so to make. We do not make history on circumstances chosen by ourselves, but on what we have inherited from the past and what has come before us in contemporary circumstances. Of particular interest for our America and developing countries generally are issues of financing for development and financing for climate action, adaptation, mitigation, and loss and damage. The World Bank and the IMF do not adequately or sufficiently meet the needs of this veritable existential midnight hour for humanity, especially for those who are the wretched of the earth, to use Frantz Fanon's compelling formulation. What do we need? We need far more concessionary finance, far more creative financial instruments beneficial to developing countries, far swifter and more efficacious disbursement of financial resources to developing countries. Fulfillment now of the pledges made by developed countries within the framework of the Conference of Parties of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Fair trade with rules-based certainty, an end to suffocating unilateral sanctions, and an end to a weaponizing of the reserve currency, the United States dollar. The Caribbean Community CELAC and the EU CELAC Summit endorsed the Bridgetown Initiative 2.0, a bundle of proposals with a progressive thrust articulated by the distinguished Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Motley. Some developed countries and even some functionaries in the World Bank and the IMF are giving lip service to this initiative, while at the same time seeking to rob it of its progressive content and intent by introducing or inserting metaphoric Trojan horses. The developing countries are alert to these shenanigans, which will be resisted. Overwhelming support from developing countries, especially middle-income countries, which are highly vulnerable to the extreme distresses of climate change and their consequences, have been gathering for the adoption through the UN system of a multidimensional vulnerability index, the MVI. This too is being bogged down and pulled hither and thither in a multitude of technicalities by the international financial institutions and their dominant stakeholders. This we have to be alert to also. It is a beastly thing that is being done to small vulnerable countries, which the world's major emitters of greenhouse gases have condemned to cycles of natural disasters, hardships, and damnation. The bulk of the 8 billion people in the world will resist. Look, there are 3 strategic approaches you can have. For developing countries, our America, to address to the dominant powers, whether you are imperialist or whether you're in quest of hegemony under any other title. You can roll over and play dead? Well, that is certainly not an option. You make accommodations as necessary and desirable in all the circumstances, being mindful that although the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, you do not climb La Soufrière Mountain by way of a straight line. You take zigs and you take zags. But to ensure that you do not end up in a cul-de-sac, that you keep your eye and your movements going towards the mountaintop. And the third accompanying strategic objective with accommodation is to resist creatively. And I use the word resist, and I'm talking about resist creatively. Resist with knowledge, with understanding, and with wisdom. And remember this, in today's world, if we can't persuade the leaders of certain developed countries, we can persuade their people. And those people can persuade them, their leaders. There's a thesis which is being advanced by some Western countries that the struggle in the world today is between democracies and autocracies. St. Vincent and the Grenadines, a strong liberal democracy with a social democratic outlook, rejects this unsound, self-serving, and even hypocritical thesis of a struggle between autocracies and democracies. St. Vincent and the Grenadines sees the struggle in this world between the dominant powers as centering upon the control, ownership, distribution of the world's resources. It has been so from time immemorial. Colonialism and imperialism have in fact exacerbated the exploitation of developing countries for the gain of the rulers of the colonial, imperial, and monopoly capitalist centers. The struggle has been among these major powers and is about who gets what, when, where, and how. Civilized life and living now demands fairness, justice, peace, security, and prosperity for all, not some. Imperial powers and would-be hegemons all prattle that they are in quest of a new world order. You hear them? I don't have to call the names of countries and blocks. Every one of them say they want a new world order. From the trenches of the periphery, St. Vincent and the Grenadines poses three haunting queries in response. What's new? Which world? And who gives the orders? Over the remaining few months of 2023, critical global gatherings are ahead. The G77 and China summit is being convened in Cuba in mid-September. A few days later, the United Nations General Assembly will be in full swing. A special convocation on the Sustainable Development Goals is being organized under the UN auspices at the time of the General Assembly. In October, the World Bank and the IMF hold their annual meetings. In late November, early December, COP28 under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change takes place in the United Arab Emirates. Our America must be in the vanguard of resetting the agenda at these and other relevant fora. In humanity's interests, inclusive of the interests of our own people's humanization, our own peoples in Latin America and the Caribbean. St. Vincent and the Grenadines is insisting, as part of the conversation on the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals in a timely manner, there must be a special carve-out for reparations. And within that special carve-out, one particularly so for Haiti. Reparations from European countries for the legacies of underdevelopment caused by native genocide and the enslavement of African bodies perpetrated by these metropolitan countries in our Caribbean, in our Latin America, and our Africa. The case for reparatory justice within the framework of the Sustainable Development Goals is compelling and unanswerably strong. St. Vincent and the Grenadines has further proposed the establishment of an Africa, Brazil, Caribbean Diaspora Commission, the ABCD Commission. The CARICOM African Union Summit last year endorsed this proposal. This permanent commission will oversee and implement a host of practical initiatives for enhanced cooperation between the 54 member countries of the African Union, which has a population of 1.4 billion. So that's the first group, Africa. Brazil with a population of 220 million, one half of whom are of African descent. The Caribbean, consisting of all 25 countries washed by the Caribbean Sea, with a population of some 300 million. It includes Mexico. It includes Colombia. It includes Venezuela. It includes all the countries in Central America washed by the Caribbean Sea. And of course, we always make sure that El Salvador is in that because they're so entwined with the rest of our Caribbean countries. And the diaspora of persons of African descent, especially in North America and Europe and those parts of Latin America not washed by the Caribbean Sea. This potentially mighty force of some 2 billion, or 1/4 of the world's population, will give contemporary meaning to the philosophy and programs of distinguished Africanist and Caribbean leaders, including the Right Excellent Marcus Mosiah Garvey, National Hero of Jamaica, who in the early 20th century in the USA, Caribbean, Canada, Latin America, and elsewhere, mobilized the largest movement of black people ever in the diaspora in the interest of their humanization. In this regard, I echo the call made by CARICOM for His Excellency Joseph Biden, President of the United States of America, our friend, to issue a pardon to exonerate Garvey for the unjust conviction of him on trumped-up charges in the federal courts in the USA in the 1920s. This is a symbolic matter of great importance to the Caribbean, Africa, and the African diaspora. Such an exoneration would be just. It would represent the healing of a painful wound. In the quest of our America to respire, to embrace fresh hope, faith, and love, I conclude with the apt words of Octavio Paz, Mexican Nobel laureate in literature, in his poem, Release. Beneath the rain of drums, the flute's black stalk grew, withered, and sprouted again. Things cast off from their names, I flowed at my body's edge among the unbounded elements. My dear friends at the OAS, some sleep to dream. We must dream to change our world for the better. I commend the national, regional, and programmatic platform that I have sketched today for your favorable consideration. Thank you. Please permit me one other act. I've given at his office, His Excellency the Secretary General, a copy of my last book, which was published in September, entitled A Time of Despair, Beyond COVID, Volcanic Eruptions, Hurricane Elsa, and Global Turmoil, Fresh Hope for St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I'd like if my dear friend, my fellow Caribbean, my sister, Audrey, if she can come and I can give her this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. I will certainly enjoy reading and learning in this book. Thank you also for the warm greetings to me and to my country, and for that very interesting, informative, and courageous presentation. We appreciate that you not only laid out an overview of the challenges in our region and hemisphere, but you have also outlined strategies and solutions for the benefit of all. We have also heard your charge that in everything we should seek understanding, but also wisdom, so that we can be mature and wise leaders in our hemisphere. We thank you again for that comprehensive presentation. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the Protocolary meeting, but I also want you to know that the presentation will be circulated to the Council. The presentation of the Prime Minister and the remarks of the Secretary General. At this time, I ask all present to greet the Prime Minister individually, starting with the delegation closest to the exit. Please rise from your seats to greet His Excellency, the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and Grenadines, Dr. Gonzalez. Thank you all for attending. The meeting is adjourned.